Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
I sent you, I hope you all got that page from the lexicon, right? I just want to glance at it because it's one thing is very clear, that this word ahav, I, aleph, hey, vet, if you look at the very upper left-hand corner, you will see that there is a cognate in Ugaritic, which is an older form of Semitic language, and there are many such cognates in Ugaritic that translate into Hebrew. So you can see there it's Yehub. I do not know how to pronounce the Ugaritic, but you can see that just by looking at the letters, it's similar, right? You got to keep in mind also that what we call the Yemota Kriya, there are four letters that function as both vowels and consonants: Aleph, Hey, Vav, Yud. And within Hebrew itself, difference between Hebrew and Aramaic, and here too in Ugaritic, those letters often interchange. So the fact that you don't see an equivalent of an aleph there doesn't mean that it's not a cognate word. And then it says Punic and Egyptian Aramaic, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a very basic Semitic word. There's no secret about it. It's no guessing. Okay. But now as you look down, I just want to call your attention that the editors of the lexicon have noted 7 different categories, general categories, some more specific than others. So just to touch base, one can love, number one, a person, a thing. In other words, it could be an idea, an action, material things, etc. 3, loving God. 4, God loving. 5, love to do something. Loving is 6, a friend. And then 7, various and sundry other ones, like a favorite wife. He likes it this way, he likes it that way, etc., etc. And then you see after that, not all of them, but a number of key citations where such usages appear. And my point in doing this is to make it just simply to indicate that how you define love depends upon about whom you are speaking, about what you are speaking, because clearly I love to cook is not the same as say I love my wife. It's got a completely different meaning to it, okay? And if I say I love God, okay, that's not the same as saying I love my grandchildren. So each usage, I love Torah, right? I love Torah. I love to read and study it and so forth and so on. Gets me excited. My pulse picks up when I find something new. But, it's not the same thing as having sex, So, I mean, it's a wide-ranging word. And so, the whole point is that's sort of a challenge. No, I guess it's helpful for the book, for Held, because it means that he can legitimately refer to various elements of human experience, human behavior, human values, and all put them under the umbrella of love, and which is, of course, as you see now, what he's doing. And each one of those categories so far that we've seen has its own nuances. It's not identical. How you love your children is different from how you love a spouse. There's no question about it. Okay, and you can the love to us with a spouse can dissipate, right? And same thing can happen with your love for a child if the child is incorrigible. I mean, unfortunately, the whole Ben Sorero Moreh, right? The rebellious son is mentioned in the Torah, and the rabbis say kill him. If you go to court, if it's validated by the court, capital punishment. Goodbye. And the rabbis, of course, can't stand that, so they say, Ben Sora Mora Lohaya Voloniya. Okay, never existed, won't ever exist. And so they say, well, why is it in there in the Torah? He says, well, you should learn something from it. That's what they say. There's nothing superfluous in Torah. But the point is, there are all kinds of reactions to love and how love operates. And that's what he's telling us. And that's a good thing, I think. To me, it's opened up my mind in a number of things. And especially in these last 2 chapters that we read, it was a long reading, I understand. But there was a lot of really meaty stuff there in different perspectives. And I found it to be actually, in terms of my own brain, very stimulating. Okay, any other comments on this regard? Yes, Heibel.
It's a different kind of question. I realized you might know. But when I was reading this, I got interested in understanding the structure of what it was. So I looked up and I think I found it's published by Brill, the academic publisher. But I found that there's a third author, Stam, and I just want to know, firstborns, we get very worked up about not getting correct due. Why is it KB and not KBS, if you happen to know?
The lexicon?
Yeah, there's a third author, Stam.
A third? No, that's... 1 second. Oh, just give me...
And I looked again, I realized way too heavy, 2 volume. I remember having looked before, but because you cited it as KB and then the main part of the title, I'm like, why isn't this KBS?
Well, that's excuse me. That's subsequently revised.
Ah, got it. Thank you very much.
Curler, Baumgartner were the original authors. Okay, hence it's noted their names. If you look at the cover, see what it says? Curler and Baumgartner, because they are the original authors. The other guy helped with with reviving it because it took a while, and they updated it, which is a good thing. All right? Okay, anyway, so that's that. Now, you guys, it's your turn. All right? So, Bert, raise your hand.
Were you asking for comments on the word love or on the book? Or both?
No, I take it wherever you want. I'm
okay. Well,
making that point.
Let me start with
Jimona?
With the word love, which not only has a lot of different meanings that are laid out as you laid it out, which it does in English as well as Hebrew or other languages, but love has a very different meaning to each individual person. And each language, for those of us who I speak 2 languages, you know that the meaning of a word is different in different languages. I speak French. Amour and love don't quite mean the same thing. And each person interprets the word in terms of their own experience in life. Yeah. So while there are some universals, there's that additional layer of meaning that different people have of the same word.
Yes, and I think, that's basically what the lexicon indicates.
Yeah.
And they, you pick your understanding based upon who you are and your situation. So
and then I just wanted to make one comment because these were very long chapters. I had the impression more that Held took ideas that he had and was looking for scriptural references rather than the other way around. That he was looking at ideas about love, and it was more that he started with the ideas and then went to references rather than he started with the references to then intuit what they meant.
I can't answer that. I don't
know.
Yeah,
but I found it fascinating and beautiful, quite frankly.
Right. Well, the early chapters sort of, there are references in all of them. Mm-hmm. Later chapters where he develops the ideas in a different way, which is fine because from one perspective, he's looking at it from a certain within certain parameters, and that same issue or matter can be seen elsewhere in different parameters. And that's okay. Oh, by the way, I want to thank you guys. Some of you sent me tapes, to listen to. I'll be very honest. I couldn't because I don't have this. This class particularly demands a lot of my time. I happen to be a slow reader. but I also want to be thoughtful in terms of, gathering information for what I send you to look at yourself. So I haven't had time to sit down unless I forget my wife, forget my grandchildren, which I don't want to do. So you'll have to excuse me if I thank you, but don't send me any more videos or tapes.
Well, I didn't send you a tape. I sent you a link. I was going to mention the discussion, though.
No, it's okay.
No, it was a discussion with Rabbi Arts and Rabbi Sharon Krause.
It was, yes.
One thing that Shai Held said, which I wanted to mention, and that is in the midst of that, which shocked me, he said he wasn't sure that he believed in God or that there was a God, which I found...
Currently?
He acted that way, but he said he wasn't sure.
Well, he's a rabbi,
I understand. I know.
Don't tell the rabbinical assembly that.
Okay.
Okay. Got to be careful. Look, I'll be honest. I think I've said it before. I consider myself a sacred agnostic. I mean, I'm a human being, therefore I am sacred. Every human being is sacred. But my point is, ask me, who is God? What is God like? I say, I don't know. I believe in God firmly. But if you ask me to give you a theological explanation, couldn't do it. And I find theology very interesting. Every theologian creates a different insight. And as long as it doesn't cross a line that I feel is immoral, unethical, evil, pagan, whatever, et cetera, I'll say, that's great. I like that. That's true. And the other guy's true. They're all true. Or they're all but they're all incomplete. And I'm sure that they'll all admit that. As I've said before, I'm a big fan of both Maimonides and those who hated Maimonides, the authors of Kabbalah. They both ultimately say the same thing, that ultimately God at the highest level is unknowable. End of discussion. We only get low-level understandings of this and that, sparks, little things, or, we can look at cosmic things, whatever. And I love, that's why I love science, because to me it affirms my faith. But on the other hand, I also love, I don't mind the questions. And I realize, the moral things, what it does for me, it thrusts the moral and ethical practices of human beings back upon us. And I don't think God creates an earthquake to punish us. Okay, like the prophet Amos does. When he talks about it, Amos lived in 750 BCE. And he says to the people in northern Israel, you just had a horrible earthquake. Why did you have a horrible earthquake? Because God's warning you, if you keep up doing what you're doing, ultimately it's going to be worse. You're going to be destroyed. And it turns out 25, 30 years later, he was right. That's probably how he got into the Bible. But the point is that, but he preached basic ideas. One of his fundamental idea is justice. Okay, tzedek. And that's his main critique. And it's these powerful, wonderful metaphors. Okay. Anyway, okay. So that's all right, Tybal. Then I want to move on to the next subject. Go ahead.
Short, but what you just said. My father was a cantor trained by his father, youngest of 10, only American born, and only one with a voice. And when he was deciding to go, and I come from that line, rabbis and cantors, generations, blah, blah, blah. When he was deciding that he wanted to go to business school, my grandfather, whom I never knew, I love this story, tried to talk my father into either cantorial school or rabbinical school. And my father said to his father, but I don't believe in God. And my grandfather, the cantor, lifelong, that was whatever, older parent, said with exasperation, but what does that have to do with anything?
Okay. No, I wouldn't, to be honest, I wouldn't ordain a rabbi who didn't believe in God in some fashion,
But what about a cantor? Oh, is that Shaliach Tzibur? Is that worse or better?
No. I think people, it's like the same thing with the priesthood. I don't view us as priests, God forbid. But if you are a person who is defined a religious leader, not cultural leader, okay? It's not just the music. I love beautiful music, okay? I love great, I am, in terms of cantors, I love cantors who lead singing, and I love cantors who do wonderful things, as long as their wonderful things doesn't make me late for lunch on Shabbos, okay? I mean, they can overdo it sometimes, and they get into their artistic mode, and, it's meshuggah, okay? But the point is, I love them both. But at the same time, I want to know that their neshama is in it, not from an aesthetic perspective, but ideologically. That, when they say, if you say Hineni on the high holidays, that you really believe that in some form or another you're standing before God. Okay, that basic principles, basic religious, basic ethical and moral principles are being tested at that time, and then that there's a power in the universe that ultimately takes into account human behavior, is affected by human behavior, and I mean this is true. I mean global warming is a result of human behavior. All right, I think we can. It's fine. It's time we can say that without a question. All right. So that means we human beings have had an impact on the world. And the world isn't going to it's not going to go out quietly on this one, as we now see. So the point is, human behavior is powerful. And the high holidays is a time for us to individually and collectively to consider that seriously, not just to sit in shul and, I shouldn't just show off my new suit, Okay. All right. Anyway, enough of that. All right. I want to go to just a couple of points. Number one, the whole issue of dealing with marital love. I think, what I liked about what he said, is its complexity. And the interesting thing is it's the same thing that he said about loving children. And he's right, and that means that those relationships have got to be taken seriously, and they have to be done thoughtfully and mutually, and it's really, these are really two very important issues, because ultimately the family, regardless of how you define it, is the building block of society. And we know today where families are messed up, people get messed up. Yeah, there are ones who can overcome that. They have very strong, capacities to fix things for themselves. But a lot of people can't. And when you have people who are scarred, who move into activity, and if it's a bad scar, other people are going to suffer from it. And you can see that in very prominent ways, unfortunately, throughout history, where people in positions of power should not have been there because they caused great destruction and horrific things, because they were scarred as children or in some fashion, whatever. So these are very important issues. Now, having said that, then, I want you to, anybody want to add anything to that right now? Yes, go ahead. Cheryl, did you raise your hand? Are you trying to, Cheryl? Did you raise your hand? Okay, so you got to unmute.
Which I have.
Okay.
It's only that in my professional life, I was a lawyer dealing with families. And I do agree with you that if you really want to damage someone, you give them the wrong family. But my colleagues and I, having dealt with divorces between us for 150 years, decided that the only way that you could actually stop people from damaging one another in families would be to raise the age of consent to marriage to 56 and put the pill in the drinking water and not allow anybody who didn't pass the appropriate parenting exams to actually have children.
Yes. I love it. Yeah.
People just, it's that Philip Larkin poem about how your parents, they fuck you up, your parents do. They do not mean to, but they do. And then he says, and of course that's because they in turn were screwed up by their parents.
Yeah.
And unfortunately it's something that does, I always think that's the curse that passes to the third and fourth generation.
Yeah. No, that's true. By the way, the rabbis understand that they don't like the idea of children being held accountable for what their parents did. But what the rabbis say is that basically that's because it is possible that the traits parents have are going to be transmitted, and they can be transmitted down the line. I mean, I'm not an expert in these things, but I know that people who are abusers of children were very often abused.
Yes, and certainly that was my experience.
Yes, and that's the reality.
With families.
And so one way or another, that's how, it gets transmitted down. Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, Tybal and then Bert.
And again, I was in the audio, so I'm not sure this is the part you're commenting about, but I expected him to use, when he was doing it set up the false dichotomy. Is it an obligation? Is it an emotion about children? And then he knocked down his false dichotomy and said both. I was expecting him to use the analogy of the dual mitzvot about Shabbos, the positive and the negative, as in two things at one, and he didn't.
Yeah, well,
unless I missed it in the audio.
Yeah, but there are many areas where that operates. So I don't think he was off base. Remember the halakha. You can find legitimately. You can find precedents for almost anything in halakha because it's so rich, right? And ancient generations are revered by subsequent generations, even though they move off of them. So if there's a pearl sitting back there, I mean, I used that in my recent tshuva regarding the matriarchs in the prayer. People ask me, well, what about variations from what you want to do that have existed for a while in different communities? And so I said, let me see what I can find. And lo and behold, I found in the Tosefta, in a compilation based on the Mishnah, but developed probably a generation after the Mishnah. So we're talking the middle of the 3rd century CE, right, in Eretz Israel, where they actually have paradigms of variations on a theme that are acceptable. And I said, you see, here's the answer. And so I'm not going to go into all the details. But I found an ancient source, which is a valued source, legitimate, and it carried the day. I mean, I got a huge majority vote, and I answered the questions that were asked, and that was it. So, I mean, but on the other hand, you can find things in the Tosefta that would curdle your blood, okay? So, I mean, the point is, and there often are, different perspectives, and it also depends how you interpret them. Okay, that's why close reading of things sometimes in context is very important to get what the intent was. But I'm not a conservative in that. You're talking about the Supreme Court now, yeah? I'm not on that. I mean, I understand that my basic principle is law evolves, and you build into the system the way that can happen. Yes, and it's based on interpretation. But I'm not going to say that just because Rabbi Meir said such and such, living in the year 150 CE, that what Rabbi Meir said is necessarily applicable in 2024. There are certain things he said that are undoubtedly applicable, but there are things that he said that make no sense. So, I mean, you got to understand that as well. So the fact that there are differing perspectives, and you say, remember, There's a famous rabbinic statement, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. These and those are the words of the living God. Okay? And you say, that's right. All right. Bert.
Just let me comment that one of the things that brought me back to Judaism as a Baal Tshuva is exactly what you were just talking about. The fact that it is a tradition more of questions than it is of answers.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of a huge warehouse or even a Costco. And yeah, you can and you do pick and choose. But getting back to the book, I found his advice and his comments on marriage and on children to be beautiful and very inspiring. And the fact that he was connecting it to the Jewish tradition and text, some of which go back all the way to the book of Breshit, yeah. I found very interesting as well, yeah. Because these are issues that are not new. And we like to think with 21st century psychology and blah, 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 that these are new things and we have new takes on them. But in fact, they're very human and they're part of the human race and they've been here for thousands of years. And that never ceases to amaze me. The power of words of people 3,000 years ago that lived completely different lives from us.
Yeah, right. Well, human nature has changed, but hasn't changed. And I think anybody, who looks at human beings can find things today that are, you'd say, don't people learn from history? Well, I'm a historian, and I can tell you, based upon my studies, the answer is no, because human impulse sometimes doesn't change. And you see the same things happening all over again. Of course, the person who's being impulsive, if they have power, says, no, I'm not like them. No, this is different, even though it's the same thing. All right, I would like to turn now to the pages that I sent you, because I didn't do this for no reason. And I would like to read with you, talking about marriage, this statement that a lot of people don't know about, and a book that people don't, understand. All right, one second. Marion, do you want to say something before I get started? Is it quick?
Yeah, just real quick. I would even go the other way with some of this, which is that the Jewish wisdom has been proven out by science. And that is, to me, the most amazing thing, that somehow our sages had a sense of all of these truths without any scientific proof of any of that, or with any, they had a knowing. And that to me is really inspiring and just, it's awe-inspiring to me to think that many of the things that our sages knew are being proven in science. And that is just, to me, remarkable.
Right. Well, I think they were, one thing you got to say about them is, many of them were keen observers of how the world operates. And the fact that they, in a certain sense, the fact that they developed a methodology of looking at texts and looking at subtleties within a text may have actually opened their eyes to subtleties in nature as well. And, I mentioned this at a Shiva Minyan the other night. I think I mentioned it to you too. The miracle of a honeybee. You heard me say this. Miracle of a honeybee. Yehuda Halevi talks about this, 12th century Spain. Okay? A honeybee. They work together in a community. They have respect for their queen. And they produce honey, which is an amazing, healthy way to get sweetener, And and they fly. And, if you look at their bodies and their wings, you say, how is that possible that those skinny wings, make those big bodies fly? Well, they've mastered that art. Same thing with the hummingbird, same thing. So, there are miracles. And he says, you don't have to look at the stars to see miracles. to see wondrous things that God created. Look around you, and they did. So I think in a certain sense that may be what it is. They were keen observers of things. Not all of them. Some of them blew it, but many of them, were very sensitive. Absolutely, I agree with you. All right. So look at this. Look at the very beginning, the first page, first paragraph. This is taking up on chapter 4, relations between a husband and a wife. So this is Igeret HaKodesh, 13th century, and I said they're Ramban with a question mark. Once again, not Rambam with an M at the end. It's a nun, an N at the end. That's Rav Moshe ben Nachman, Moses the son of Nachman, not also called Nachmanides, not Maimonides. And he was very active in Spain in the second half of the 13th century. He ultimately made Aliyah to Israel in 1270, and that's where he died. He's a strong Zionist. Anyhow, but he probably didn't write this because there's nothing else in his writing that relates to that picks up on this, except for the fact that he was a mystic. So this book, the Igeret HaKodesh, the Sacred Letter, is a book that is very sensitive to husband-wife relations, but it is in fact a statement of mysticism. It is a Kabbalistic statement. It may have been written before the Zohar even came out. The Zohar, the great book compilation of Kabbalah, the foundational Bible of Kabbalah, if you will, came out around 1280, 1290. So this was probably written before that because it seems from people who've done the investigation that it picks up on elements that were much more prominent within Kabbalistic circles in the middle of the century rather than toward the end of the century. And the interesting thing is the author, whomever it was, and to this day, there's no clear answer to who the author was. But the point is, they explicitly refers to Maimonides on, almost quoting chapter and verse in The God of the Perplexed to pick up on his Aristotelian philosophy, which the author of this book totally disagrees with. Because Maimonides tend to downplay the physical, because he was Aristotelian. And hence sexual activity is seen as a means of reproduction, hence it's sacred and important. But at the same time, one should not get too wrapped up in the sexuality of it. And the physical body is something that has to be contained, because the ultimate essence of the human being, says Maimonides, is your capacity to understand, knowledge and understanding, the mind. That's for Rembaum the key thing. Now, this person doesn't deny the value of the mind, the author, but this is a person who says the body is also a vehicle for praising God, for sanctifying God. And the body can be combined with the mind, can be used as a vehicle for actually creating a relationship with God and having an impact on God. And ultimately, it was part of the process that where you end up in the Zohar and subsequent generations of Kabbalists, that human activity can actually have an impact on God. Human activity can have an impact on God. So, for example, if you understand God as the Ein Sof, the infinite element of God, and a lower emanation of that human beings can gain contact with, the 10 Sefirot, the 10 emanations from God, 10 emanations from God. All right? So God is a composite of eternity, infinity, and finiteness, relative finiteness, okay? Well, but unfortunately, if human beings sin, that sends up negative energy into the lower emanation and causes separations to occur that weaken its power and allow evil to come in and increase the chaos within God. And if we keep doing that, then that's just the universe, they're never going to destroy that, but chaotic process will take place. That's called the dark side, the Sitra Achra, the other side of existence. Okay? It's I see hands, just a second, guys. If you look at the Star Wars, I say is very Kabbalistic. The dark side. Okay, the dark side. An amorphous power of negation, right? Okay. The point is, on the other hand, if we do mitzvot, if we do things that are consistent with the principles that God has laid down for us, for our Jew in Torah, right? Then by doing that, we can actually strengthen the bonds within the lower emanations, reduce the level of chaos in the universe, and then create a ladder through which we can actually gain a closer relationship with God. But that depends on us. So, Friday night, right? When you think about Kabbalat Shabbat, the welcoming in of Shabbat, you've got to think about this. Because basically it's based on, they're all saying the same thing. On Friday night, Kabbalat Shabbat means that there is going to be it's a day of a wedding that is recurring once a week. A bonding between two elements, the two most dynamic elements within the lower 10 Sefirot. Between Tiferet, which is Adonai, and Malchut, okay, which is Shechina, male and female. And when the evil gets in and judgment is active dealing with it, that relationship gets strained. But on Shabbat, judgment goes away. And if we do our job on Shabbat of creating love, harmony, peace, tranquility, and sending that message up, then we bond, we create a stronger bond between these two entities. And Tiferet is male, Shekhinah is female. Okay? And they are bonding. Who creates the bond? We do. What does this have to do with it? If you do that, then you are acting in a way that sends that powerful spiritual power up, and you enable the bond between Tiferet and Malchut to occur. So you allow, on Shabbat, it's a foretaste, if you will, of the Messianic era, in the sense because Kabbalah believes that when the Mashiach comes, evil will go away, and the bonding that takes place in heaven will be permanent, and the dark side will be defeated. All right? So once a week, we get an opportunity to see a foretaste of it. That's Shabbos. And so when you have sex on Shabbat, and they discuss when's the best time, when Shabbat is in, some will say midnight because, the meal and all that stuff is over. It's quiet, right? And you can then focus on your love for each other. But it's got to be done with feeling. It's got to be done with a sense of ruchaniyut, spirituality. But the physicality of it, because the body is a means of creating a bonding with God, the physicality of it has got to be managed properly as well. And that's what this is all about. That's what this is about. It's beautiful, right? And it makes a lot of sense, too. I mean, if you read it closely, just take a moment right now. Stop. Let me do this. I see the hands. Let's give us a chance to read it over. Then I'll take your hands. All right? I'll answer you. But please read that paragraph one more time and then think about it a little bit. I'll get back to you in a short while. Okay. All right. So Cheryl Marian, and then Tybal.
Thank you. This is something that's probably secondary to what you were saying, but I've never been that fond of Maimonides because I tried the Guide to the Perplexed and it left this one terminally bewildered. But well, it did. It's complicated and it just seemed to make things worse. Anyway, but what you're suggesting he says sounds almost like St. Paul. And Paul is my least favourite in the New Testament, I have to say. He didn't like women. He didn't like sex. He took the attitude that it was better to marry than to burn. And the Christian tradition has come up with this idea that, sex is evil, and if you really want to be close to God, you steer well clear of the opposite sex and preferably wall yourself up in a monastery or a nunnery. And I didn't realise that Maimonides sounds as though he's coming from the same place.
Yeah, Greek. It's Aristotelian. It's Greek philosophy. All right. Remember, Paul was raised in a Hellenized society. He was exposed to these ideas. Okay. I don't think he was a great philosopher, but he was clearly exposed to these ideas. And it fit in with him, and it fit in, remember, his whole purpose of his theology, which focused on something which the original Christians maybe did not have in mind at all. The notion that human sin is transmitted physically, right? It was a physical act, and hence physical things physicality is the medium through which sin is transmitted. So you need a high level of spirituality, which is moving beyond physicality, to deal with that. And that, of course, is the whole purpose of the death of Jesus. And believing, that's where faith in that becomes, it's a blend of spirit and intellect that is supposed to put you in touch with Jesus. And Jesus is the vehicle. That's why ultimately, if you read closely, if you read the Gospels, you will see that the notion of the whole purpose of his physical death, and this was something that was debated afterwards, was he really man and God simultaneously? Because that's the ultimate place where Christianity ended up. The answer was yes, because on the one hand, he needed to be divine so he could contact the Father and be the conduit for relationships with the Father. But at the same time, in order for him to atone for the sins of people who are material, he had to be fully material. And so that's how that all worked out. But yes, so there was a Greek, look, the fact is there are Greek traditions and Greco-Roman traditions that emphasize physicality to an extreme, right? The orgies that they would have that would be part of their celebrations and all that stuff. And then the whole notion of dealing with, forgetting, the belief or the concept of a God who is active. God, they don't care about us. They're busy with their own stuff. So what difference does it make anyway? Okay, so there was a lot of that physical stuff. So Paul's pushing back at that. Yes. But here, this is taking a different tack altogether. If you literally, it says, you excite her emotion, appease her mind, and delight her with joy. Emotion, mind, joy. Okay, so that's the whole point. All right.
I'm just surprised that that Maimonides was quite as Pauline as he was.
Yes, of course. I feel the same way. I'm not a Kabbalist, but I appreciate something like this. Yeah, definitely, because I believe. Look, why do we say blessings for food all the time?
Quite.
It's very physical. Why do we say, by the way, the rabbi, why don't you say a blessing before having sex? The answer is because they don't expect you to focus on that at that moment. It's inconceivable. Pardon the pun. It's inconceivable. Okay, you got it. All right. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah. Very wise. Very wise. But everything else, it's physical. You want a drink of water. You come out of the bathroom. Blessings for everything. Physical. Christians couldn't understand that. Obviously, our tradition is right. Can't deny our physicality. Use it as a vehicle for understanding and appreciating all the amazing things that go on in our body. Right? So that's part of it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So anyways, I forgive you that you're not excited about Rembaum. I am very ambivalent on Rembaum. I've read his stuff. I've critiqued his stuff. There's a lot of nice stuff that he said, makes sense to me. Some good insights, which I appreciate thoroughly, but there's some bad stuff there too. So, yes. All right, Marion.
So what I was originally, a lot has been said since I put my hand up, but one of the things that I put my hand up for was this idea that mind and body, or Tiferet and Malchut, as you started to talk about, my sense is that I'm not sure whether it was the rabbis, I'm not enough of a scholar to figure this out, but that whatever, or the Kabbalists talked about mind really being the heart, that when they referred to mind, they really referred to the heart. And that, in what you talked about with Tiferet and Malchut, tends to bear that out, that it's not that we don't use our intellect. I'm not saying that, but that the real balance, the real importance is in the heart. And that's, of course, the book is about love. So that, to me, is a key to understanding, because I think many of us get stuck in our heads. Not that that's not valuable. I think it's really important, but it's not the focus. The focus is in the heart. And that is, I think, part of what you were saying with the Tiferet and Malchut piece also. And then just on this piece here, I just want to say, where is the woman's role in this?
Right. Yeah. Well, that was, of
She's
course,
totally passive. But anyway, but in terms of that, I really feel like this. It's me when I start getting too much into my head, and I mean, I love these classes. I'm here, obviously. I really do want to banter these things around. They really inform my heart. They're not in themselves. They are not the goal or the main piece.
Right. Well, if you look here, the notion, this author understands that heart and mind operate together. Okay? Because he mentions the mind. I'm not sure what they understood at that point in medical history, if they fully understood what the brain was doing. I don't know. But the fact is, the heart in ancient traditions, biblical and rabbinic, is the source of both intellect and emotion.
Okay. That's what I'm trying to clear up right now, because
but we know today, I mean, look, let's be honest.
The heart, mind, and the brain mind, the nervous system, then the vagal nerve goes, I mean, that's my field of expertise. So the vagal nerve goes down there, and the whole idea is that there's input both directions and all that kind of stuff.
Yes,
so that's what I'm talking about too. When I was talking about science is proving what we already knew, right. That's one of the things that's happened when they've discovered all these things about the nervous system. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that they're all intertwined. Absolutely.
It's completely, yeah. And the vagus nerve is like key to so many things.
Yes.
And that's that it goes to the heart and it goes below the diaphragm into the gut. And those are,
right. I know. I've had vasovagal episodes from time to time. Not many, thank God.
But I'm talking about the way the nervous system works in terms of the mind.
No, I understand
in terms of the physical body too, but obviously, and they're obviously related.
Right. I mean, but we know that ultimately the heart is a pump for blood, and the brain is really the integrator of all activity in the body, right?
No, that's actually what they're finding is not true. They're finding that is not true, that actually the heart and the gut are running a lot of the show.
Because of chemicals that they produce?
Chemicals and the directions they thought were one way are now finding
I see. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I got it.
What I'm saying is, yes, there's this executive function, the frontal lobe and all that does that. but that's no longer that. It's still the override and all that. And what we're learning about all these things is that the other pieces, the emotions and the heart, the love, is key, as it was told way back when, that it is key, and it does run the show, and it sends information to the whole body. Yes, it sends chemicals.
Right, but my question would be, though, what is it in the heart, scientifically, physically, that affects, let's say, our capacity to understand, let's say, high levels of mathematics?
I think that those things are all related. I mean, I'm no Einstein, but the idea that he had these insights and revelations and all the stuff that was way ahead of his time, that came from his sense of self inside. It didn't just come from his brain. It came from everything, knowing what was going on.
He was a pretty well-balanced person.
Exactly.
But you have also people who are brilliant and can do science similar to Einstein, who are SOBs, and who, as a human being, don't know how to operate.
Okay.
Just all over the place.
Yes, I'm not saying that.
All right. So I'm
saying that, but what I'm saying is using those is to make a human being
a
good human being.
Right. I would say, though, that these people back then did not understand the connectedness between what's in the head and what's in, and the activity, the physical activity of the heart.
Well, I think they understood the real
reason why they associated with the heart, because very often when you get emotionally excited, your heartbeat changes, and they could feel it. Remember, they were very sensitive to things that were very physical. They could not see the synapses in the brain clicking. They had no idea about that, right? So they saw that the heart beats differently, or you have a different sense of feel about you, which is what this is talking about, actually, right? That when you get into a mode for sexual activity, you blank out a lot of things that are going around you, right? Okay. And if I wanted to be very cynical, I could say, sure, that's important, because the whole existence of your line, your capacity to reproduce, is such a basic, fundamental process that it has to take over everything for it to operate properly. Okay? And that has nothing to do with love. That's basic animal instinct. Because as it says over here, like a lion, right? A lion, do we know that a lion loves the lionesses? We don't know that, okay? We've never heard a lion say, I love you. They can be very active. I know, believe me, I'm not a big expert on lions. But I've seen, sometimes I go on all these scientific videos that you can pick up on randomly. Yeah, they're fascinating. And the people who take them, and they know what they're talking about. Yeah, I mean, a lion can have sex multiple times with the same lioness, right? And they can get very, very hot to trot there, But the point is, then they can walk away and 2 hours later get another one and do it. It's like a king with a harem. Okay, so the point is, there's a certain, what we would call animal instinct that's very physical, that exists within us, but there are also other levels of expression. Okay, now I'm agreeing with you that, yes, the heart and the nervous system send impulses and send blood all over the place, including to the brain, right? And therefore they are definitely all interconnected. I agree on that point 100%. All right? I would just say, though, that there's nothing physically in the heart per se that can generate the comprehension of things the way the brain does. Okay? The heart is not aware of the beauty that a man and a woman see in each other, the physical beauty. That comes from the eyes, which goes to the brain, right? The heart doesn't generate that. That can have an impact on the heart, though, right? Because as sexual activity increases, we know the heart rate goes up. And so there is definitely a connection there. And you could argue the point that when the heart rate grows up, that's going to cause the brain to continue to operate so that you can finish the job. Okay? So, I'm not a scientist, but basically that's how I would understand it. But I think you're right in the sense that the ancients understood, because of what I said before, because they were very sensitive to things, that there is some form of interactivity. And in that point, I think they're absolutely right. Okay? So I would agree with you with one, just with a slight modification of what you just said. Okay? I mean, look, I don't want to pour cold water on your concept of the heart. I mean, as this in itself says, emotion, which is not necessarily rational, is a factor that has to be at play here, because the emotional element of it is what we would call the love side. The mind, the intellect side, is something else. That means that you can comprehend what you may be talking about, the impact that this is going to have on the connection. What they believe, the Kabbalists believe, that by doing this, you're going to create a connection within God's self. But you have to understand that and comprehend that. That's something that they would say was part of your mind, your intellect, because it requires thought and understanding. But the emotion is wrapped up with that. They operate together. That's what this is saying. And the whole purpose of what this is supposed to do is to create the proper mixture of all of this together, so that the sex act can indeed send the energy up to God to have the proper impact on God. That's what the Kabbalist is saying. Okay? And I mean, I would agree with that in the sense that I think that's why I think Rembaum is wrong, that if sex act is viewed as simply a means of reproduction, okay, then you're missing the whole point. And frankly, a cold sex is not a healthy sex. Sex should be passionate, right? And that's what this is saying. So yeah, in that respect, the heart's got to be there. So I would say the heart, it deals with the non-rational element of human activity that has to be controlled sometimes, because keep in mind, the problem with the heart in this regard is that a person, I'm thinking now about the example we talked about, I think yesterday, I'm not sure, with the rape of Dinah, right? So Shem, the guy who raped Dinah, Jacob's daughter, said he fell in love with her and he jumped on her. That the impulse was created because he fell in love with her. All right, that doesn't justify what he did. But the point is that, and he wanted to marry her. Now, if she was horrible in his sight, clearly which she wasn't, he wouldn't have said, I want to marry her. It was an impulse on his part. And that motivated them to start thinking, wow, that may be a good idea, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, that's something that Dinah's brothers picked up on and said, that doesn't justify what he did. The guy should have kept his impulses under control. Okay, all right. Anyhow, point is, though, that we know that uncontrolled emotion, especially with regard to sexuality, can cause great pain and suffering. So that has to be controlled in a certain degree by what we would say is the mind. The values that govern human behavior, that govern relationship, what Held is talking about, have to be in play to take this power and to not let it become a power for evil. The rabbis tell us that were it not for the Yetzer Hara, the inclination toward evil, we wouldn't reproduce. So they're not saying reproduction is evil, what they're saying is what is called the Yetzer Hara is meaning something that can end up doing evil. But according to Jewish tradition, if you know Torah, and this would fit in perfectly with what this is saying, if you know Torah and appreciate what Torah says about relationships and the sanctity of a human being created in God's image, then clearly you're going to take your sexuality and channel it in a beautiful, positive way and not allow it to go crazy so you jump on every woman who attracts you. Okay? So in a sense, Torah says you have to let your intellect, your understanding of the concept of mitzvah and value to control the emotion, which is a powerful physical force that exists, to be sure, but it's got to be kept under control. Okay. All right. Tybal.
So it's going to be two-part, the 4:15 warning, but that's not why I raised my hand this time. I mentally, when I learn Talmud, I have this mental list of texts that are many human societies aren't there with male-female relations. I'll just leave it at that. And then Los Angeles resident Maggie Anton in 2016, remember, had that book about Talmud, 50 Shades of Talmud. The title won't hold up, but it was all about sex-positive Judaism. So the first time I read this in preparation, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll add it to my list. I need your help, oh my teacher, because when you just had us read it, and Marian alluded to this, all this did was annoy me, this rereading, because it's not just, oh yeah, it's addressed to the man. It leaves no room for the woman, not just to initiate, but to be part of it, to respond. There's no, yes, given physical strength, way more likely men are going to overpower women and all those things, but it leaves no,
I have an answer.
Room, but the part is not just the initiation for the woman's. God should be guiding women how they should respond to men, or I won't say men and women, but there should be guide for an initiator, guide for the stronger one, and then guide for the one who's then a partner within it, even when you're just looking at the conventional men and women within marriage.
Yeah. Well,
the 4-minute warning for calendar.
Yeah, thank you. Right. No, my answer to you is this is the weakness of a patriarchal society. That's why I am totally opposed to patriarchy. A woman should have the privilege of beginning this process as much as a man. And the woman should be taught to say the same thing when she responds to the man or when she gets a response from the man. And she should be concerned about his capacity to complete the process as well as he should be concerned about hers. It should be totally mutual. I agree. It's a flaw in the system because that was the nature of culture up until the modern period with rare exceptions. Okay, all of the great thinkers of Judaism up until, 20th, 19th century, I don't know when it's started to flip. But the vast majority of them believed in a patriarchal society where there were areas where men just had to dominate. The fact of the matter is, halakhically, the responsibility for having children, for fulfilling the obligation of be fruitful and multiply, rests with the man.
The man?
Not the woman. The man. That's clear. Read halacha. The man is responsible. So that's why this is framed totally from a male perspective. By the way, it's a deviation from Genesis 1. It's based on Genesis 2 and 3, which is a different understanding of how men and women were created. And there it's clear that the husband is the dominant one. And it's clear that the woman is a product of the man, right? So she is secondary. And based upon that, the whole interpretation of how the relationships between men and women would unfold put the woman in second place. Remember, it says at the end of chapter 3, and then the man will have dominion over you. That's what it says. That's what God said to Eve. Okay, and you will lust after him. You're going to be going, please help me, have sex. It's all up to him. It's all up to him. Now, Rembaum says that if a woman says, my husband does not satisfy my sexual needs, Rembaum in one of his rulings, in his true vote, says that's grounds for divorce, because the husband should be sensitive to that in the woman. Good for him. But it doesn't deny the fact that the man still has to initiate. Same thing like with a get, with a bill of divorce. The man has to initiate it to this day. Okay? So that whole impact of patriarchy has been a major flaw in the Jewish tradition, as it is in Islam, as it is in many, many facets of Christianity, as it is in most religions around the world. We are no different in that regard. That's why, for me, the whole notion of putting matriarchs into the first blessing of the Amidah and saying they are also part of the creation of our people means to say that we're all equal on that. And I want to remind you, Genesis chapter 1, what does it say? God creates male and female, right? Both of them. And that's being in the image of God. So male and female are both in the image of God. And he says, prurvu, be fruitful and multiply. Plural. To whom does he give the command? Plurally, to both men and women. Both the man and the woman are told plurally together, have sex, have kids, and plurally told rule. So yes, women can be dominant as well. Okay? The rabbis twist it around and say, it says V'kiv shuha, that afterwards it says, and conquer, take over, control the rest of creation. The rabbis say, no, that means that the man should control the wife. They take it totally out of context and reinterpret it to be the man's the boss. So, my dear, that's the problem. All right? And I agree 100% that that's a weakness here. So, I would say to you, as I said at the outset, this should be something that was written from the two of them, both perspectives. And I've got to tell you, the problem with Kabbalah is that it is clearly the male side that is in charge. Okay? The Sefirot are divided between male and female. All right? Now, here's the rub. Which side is responsible for the compassion, and which side is responsible for the judgment?
Male for compassion.
The male side is the compassionate side. The female side is the judgment side. How about them apples? So. And the whole purpose is for having the compassionate side to control the judgment side, because judgment left out of control creates chaos. All right? Isn't that surprising? You probably thought that, of course, the women would be the compassionate ones. The men are. Really flips things around, doesn't it? So there are things in our system that need to be fixed. Yes. Okay. Barbara.
The compassionate part fits with this first chapter that you gave us to discuss the Held pages as to what do we think. And the compassionate side is clearly in that paragraph, because the man has to be sure that the woman is able to come along and the woman can finish, and acknowledges that it takes longer for a woman to finish than for a man. So that requires the man to be compassionate, just to be able to make sure his partner is in accord with the way he's going.
Yeah, okay, that's their view, but I think you and I know that there are situations where the woman reacts more immediately than the man.
Not many.
I don't know. I haven't done a poll on that.
It's more often a female takes longer. That's from having been in medical school. You learn.
All right. Okay. Well, I don't know. I can't answer. I can't respond on that one. Okay. Yes. All right. Okay. 1 second. All right, Cheryl. Unmute. You want to say? Oh, you did. Okay.
Yes, I have. what I found interesting was what you just said, that judgment running wild creates chaos.
Yes.
I would have thought that unbridled compassion was more likely to create chaos, only because when one looks at things like the current responses to people who allegedly are anti-trans, or the current responses by those who know very little to what's going on in Gaza, what I would call bleeding heart liberals, forgive me, seems to me to be more chaotic than any level-headed judgment might be.
Yeah, well, let me say this. I'm not going to make judgments about all of that. I can't. But
No.
Back to what this said. If you read the Zohar, it's quite clear that evil came into the world because the sphira of Gvura, which means strength, which is feminine, which is sphira of judgment, and when the emanation of these elements was taking place, before Tiferet, which is the balancer between compassion and judgment, was created, in that split second, judgment, female, decided that she wanted to do a creation, an emanation on her own. And she did it. And out of that came the dark side.
I have to say that it strikes me that that book was written by a man.
Of course. Yeah, but what wasn't?
Well, there is that.
Most of the stuff was, I don't know for sure. Some people say one of the approaches in the Torah was written by a woman, but then they don't understand Hebrew. It was based on an English translation, and they totally missed what was being said. No, I mean, there's very little that you can point to that you can say women wrote it. It wasn't. It was all controlled by men. Do we have priestesses? Is there a Kohenet is the daughter of a priest, but she can benefit from as a priestly family person, but she can't offer sacrifices. Same thing with the Levites. There's no lady, female Levites. The orchestras and the choirs in the temple were all men. I mean, I can go on and on and on. I want you to look at the Sheva Brachot, which are part of marriage, right? And they are on the first page and the second page. Read them over quickly and tell me, what do they have to do with marriage?
Well, I think number one is blessing the wine is just a question of, we do this every Shabbat for holidays when we eat. So it's kind of like, this is like the best one that I could think of for anointing something. They're starting off the blessing of just the event, not of the people, but just the event that is taking place, to start off, to then go from there. Then when we get down to number 5, I don't quite understand the barren one rejoicing greatly and calling the barren one Yerushalayim. Why would a barren one rejoice when they can't give birth?
Okay, I'll explain.
The Bible says we're supposed to give birth.
All right, so the first answer, I mean, in terms of Bar Priya Gofen, I think you're right, because normally we associate that with Kiddush, right?
Right.
It's a means of sanctification.
I think, yeah, that's the word I couldn't think of.
First of all, the first part of the wedding, the whole notion of the ketubah and the rings, et cetera, is part of Kiddushin, which means sanctification or setting apart as unique. In this case, it's both, right? Because you are unique to one another in the sense that you are both the only ones who are entering into the relationship, but you're also sanctifying an act, a process that is holy. And so, we always use wine for the Kiddush. So it is a process of sanctification. And what it does is it carries what we did. You see, the blessings for betrothal says, Mekadesh Adam Yisrael Alidei Chuppah v'Kiddushin, who God sanctifies the children of Israel through the marriage canopy, which is marriage, and kiddushin, which is betrothal. So that whole process, so you have the process of sanctification already in the blessings of betrothal, and this carries it over now into the blessings for the marriage itself. So you're good on that point. The Akara, Jerusalem, remember, the whole point, this is a messianic dream, that the joy, the rejoicing of this marriage will be so powerful that ultimately Jerusalem, which is barren in the sense absent of her people, okay, she's like a mother that can't have kids. She's sitting there with no Jews, right, basically. And the fact is that for many, many, many centuries, the Jewish population in Jerusalem was quite small, if at all, right? The Christians, the Romans didn't allow anybody in there. Later on, they began to trickle in under the Christians, but small minority people, most of the Jews in Eretz Yisrael lived up in the galaxy of the Galilee. I live on Galilee. Well, some of us think we are in the galaxy. Anyway, but point is that, so Jerusalem, the barren Jerusalem, the devoid of Jews, her children aren't there. So this is saying, may this marriage, the joy of the bride and groom, carry over ultimately to Jerusalem. And what's in the back of this is what you see in the seventh blessing, which is from Jeremiah, which foresees men and women, young men and women rejoicing in Jerusalem. So this is connected to that. But the centrality, the whole point of this is, today, and here again, this is something that a lot of people in the world don't understand, that the centrality of Zion and Jerusalem for the Jewish mind and the Jewish spirit and what it means to be Jewish is huge. And to simply say, well, Zionism is secular, Judaism is something else, separate the two, pardon my French, that's a bunch of BS. Judaism is founded on Zionism. The whole concept of the centrality of Jerusalem and the Holy Land is central to Judaism. All right, and I'm not speaking as a right-wing nationalist here. I'm speaking as a Jew who appreciates what Judaism teaches. And it's part of our sacred culture. Okay, and that's what this is about. All right, that's why we break a glass. Why do you break a glass?
To celebrate the rebuilding of Jerusalem.
Right, it's the broken Jerusalem, the destroyed temple. Reminds us that our joy is incomplete until that Jerusalem is restored. I don't believe in rebuilding the temple, but having Jerusalem be the spiritual center of my faith, I'm totally in favor of that. That's why it pains me that the Jewish community in Jerusalem is split into so many factions. That bothers the heck out of me. Okay? All right, anyway. Okay, so Tybal and then Bobby.
So I see the first blessing in a different context. And I want to say, too, it's more than just Friday night. The blessing's done on Chagim. It's done on life cycle. And for me, in a certain way, when I think about Judaism, the two main lenses are holidays, liturgy, whatever. The two main lenses are Hebrew calendar and 7 species. There are 7 species that we use to sanctify. Wheat for the bread, which doesn't quite fit. Olives for the olive oil, the candlelight. And that's dependent on a time of day. And remember in the book, Rabbi Shai Held talked about nighttime. Weddings are more often at nighttime. That's more anxiety. But the one that's really universal to sanctify are grapes for wine, or I would say grape juice. So to me, this not only is about not a limited sanctification, it's a universal for Jews sanctification. And that's why it had to be first, because it's then, when you think about it, there were some later, I think it's 2 that said, oh, God created the whole world, and 3, God created humanity, that are universalistic. But it wouldn't be set in the frame of being Jewish if it didn't start out with the wine, that in some ways most special of the 7 species.
Yes.
Though I can argue pomegranate being special in other ways. But anyway, for this and sanctification, so it had to be the wine to start to set the boundaries. This is Jewish sacred space. And then you go to, oh yeah, the whole world. Yeah, humans. Yeah, this. And then the other question you asked about, oh, what does this have to do? I think you've already answered the whole question because, or I could invoke Rabbi Elliot Dorff again. Judaism is much more founded on the notion of community. We need a minyan to do this. We need this to do that. It's the next building block of the Jewish people is this couple in a marriage, but it's a marriage set within a context that is witnessed and has certain sacred and has certain rituals. And that's what I think.
Okay. I agree with what you're saying. I think that there's a couple other things to keep in mind. Number one is that Kedusha, sanctification, is I would say it's the highest principle in Judaism. And that's what this is about. This is elevating marriage into that level of the highest elements. As you said before, sacred time, sacred space, sacred eating, and reproduction, if you will, and love that are part of what marriage is about is of the highest caliber. And therefore you have a whole series of blessings that in fact, the whole point here is there are not many things that have many, many blessings associated with them. Right? You have the Amidah, if you think about it. Birkat Hamazon ended up with 4, but here you got 7. And the 7, of course, is the whole number of creation. So it's a celebrating creation as well. And so there are all kinds of facets to this. I agree with you 100%, absolutely. But there's something else too. The latter 2 blessings, which deal with the bride and the groom, deal with the whole notion of the simcha, the mitzvah to rejoice, right? Well, in the Psalms it says, Yain yisamach lev enosh. Wine causes the soul, the heart of the Jew, to rejoice, right? So it is the substance of rejoicing as well. So it also means that you're sanctifying the rejoicing with the bride and the groom, even before you get into it. So I think there's so many facets to it. So yes, I agree. Bobby.
I found it revelatory where Rabbi Held talked about the concept that the Jewish wedding is hardly about the couple, that it's really about a communal celebration much more than it is about the individual couple. And that explains some of these incongruous seeming brachot and the Sheva brachas in a personal marital ceremony.
Right. Very good. Yes, I mean, that's true. But you got to keep in mind the reference here to creation of human beings is that has to do with one of the main reasons for marriage. Right? Imitation of God, imitatio Dei. God, the whole point is God creates human beings to create human beings. In chapter 1, it's a mitzvah, and basically saying you're the only creatures on earth who can create human beings, except for me.
And in particular, a Jewish wedding is to create Jewish families.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is all in the family.
That's why it's a communal event rather than a couple or a personal event.
That's the next step, yes. The point is that ultimately the foundation of the community is the family. We talked about that last night. Family is the foundation of the community. You don't have community unless you have family. The future of the people rests with the family. That's procreation. Teaching Torah begins with the family, right? As you saw when you read later on, teaching Torah is one of the basic elements that is what is expected of parents to do with their children. It's their obligation for the children. So all of this revolves around what you're saying is the foundation of the Jewish people is the family. And but it begins with 2 individuals, right? That's the whole point. So that takes us back to Genesis chapter 1, right? Two individuals at the outset in chapter 1 are charged with the responsibility of reproducing. In chapter 2, the couple does not learn about their reproductive capacities until after they eat from the tree. They didn't know that they were naked. They had no concept of their sexuality until they ate from the tree. Isn't that interesting? Chapter 1, from the get-go, God says, reproduce. So this actually reflects chapter 1 of Genesis, that the human being was created, and out of that human being came, out of those two human beings, came the human race. So there's so many levels to this. That's what I find fascinating about the blessing. So basically, and the fact that you have, it's interesting, two blessings dealing with the creation of the human being, parallel the two blessings at the end about rejoicing with the bride and the groom. Okay, keep that in mind. So that means that what we're talking here is the sanctity, the holiness of the act that two human beings produce. That's paralleled by the rejoicing in the culmination of that process. And it's after the Sheva Brachot then that they can go and procreate. And the fact is, the chuppah initially was a marriage tent into which the bride and groom would go after the ceremony and have sex. They would consummate their marriage. Okay, once society changed. Because remember, initially, where did people get married? Go back to 500 BCE. No, 500 CE, where a lot of this is already beginning to come together. Where were they? Where did they get married?
Probably in the parents' tent.
Yeah.
Wait, 500 common era?
They got married on the parents' property, and they put up a tent next to the house. After the wedding, that's where they went. And Yichud, which now we do symbolically for 10 minutes afterwards, they are together. As I say, it's short enough to fulfill the obligation, but too short to have sex. Okay? But initially, they would consummate right there. And so that was all part of the process of marriage. Yes, and it was very private. It was the family, whatever, friends, who knows. But it was and that's the way it was. And the shomer who was supposed to stand by the door, keep people away, probably developed that people just make sure nobody got too close to the tent. Don't stay away from here. Leave them alone. Leave them alone. Okay. So
when my sister got married, she was taking way too long for Yichud. They were out half an hour, 45 minutes. So I went over there as her older sister to say, hey, you got to come. And the rabbi was standing there as the shomer. He said, you can't interrupt them. I said, I can. I'm her older sister. I mean, it was too long. They had to get out there with the guests. Yeah, it was at least 45 minutes. It wasn't even half an hour.
Wow. Okay. All right, Taibo.
Just something from Ashkenazim and genealogy, because once the custom of Sheva Bracha dinners started and you had shmals, stetels or whatever, where people couldn't be taking all the time to go off, it became the custom for the shtetl to host the wedding, and lots of couples married that same date.
Yeah.
Like
right.
The siblings would marry your cousin. I don't mean marrying each other. I meant it became even more communal among Ashkenazim in Eastern Europe.
Well, but also the whole issue has nothing to do with Ashkenazim. It had to do with urbanization. Because by the 8th, 9th century, urbanized Jews in both the Sephardic and the Ashkenazic worlds was the norm. We left farming behind. Remember, in rabbinic times, farming, agriculture was the main economic activity in Eretz Yisrael. In Babel, it began to change. But we know very little about how these things were, when the whole transition process took place. But clearly, when you lived in the Jewish quarter in a town, which Jews tended to do in both the Arab world and the Christian world, they wanted to be together. That they could have a synagogue that way, they could have a school that way, whatever, okay? as the communal structure of Jewish life developed physically, and the Jews were not scattered out over farmlands. All these things had to adapt and change. And ultimately, the chuppah lost its walls because it was used symbolically to fulfill the mitzvah of chuppah, right? And there was no tent set up in the courtyard of the shul or the courtyard of the square in the Jewish community. They had to do that in a house, and that was postponed until after the dinner. So it changed. We can adapt, right? But there's a lot of history here. Not a lot. It's a lot of it is, what we understand. There's not a lot of concrete evidence. Okay? All right. Start reading ahead. Okay? We will look and see how juicy the next section is. And if it's not as juicy as this stuff has been, I might continue with some of the stuff from this. And but if it really gets to be very juicy, we'll move on.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.